sure this must seem obvious to many of us, but it bears repeating, that when you are cut off from relationships that are so old in your organism, that you are evolved with, and yet you are cut from them, especially when they are these large-scale relationships, even with the air itself, and sensing the ground not just as an object, but as a presence that feels your steps as you walk upon it. Wow. But you're no longer feeling that, and you're not feeling the air as a living source of nourishment. We'll come back to that with your question of spirituality. But when we're cut from that, then yes, we are completely, easily susceptible to all the commercial beckonings of commodities, that something is going to make me feel better. Let me buy this, or I need this new computer, or this new smartphone, but it's not good enough. After a few weeks, what's the next one? This is what. And we keep trying to fill that gap, but nothing is going to suffice short of opening up our heart again. Which I am saying a little differently, opening up our senses again to the whole body of the sensuous, even in the middle of the city, to the city buildings, to the ground. What I am intending to suggest here, or intending to bring across or communicate, even across a language barrier, is that the ecological crisis, the extreme environmental crisis in which we now find ourselves, with so many other species, other animals, and plants, whole other styles of sensitivity and sentience vanishing from the world rapidly, day by day, as the planet itself is shivering into a bone-wrenching fever, as the climate itself is heating up much more quickly than we had anticipated. It seems to me that this situation is usefully looked at as a kind of perceptual crisis, that it is born of a kind of sensory blindness that we humans have not really, for quite a while, we just haven't really noticed or seen that this actual earth is really here, that these other animals are really a part of the same world that we inhabit. The plants, the waters. I mean, we see the land, but we don't really see it. We don't feel it. We don't sense it with any intensity, with anything of the poignancy or strength with which our organism could be sensing the rest of nature. Somehow our eyes have become somewhat blind, our ears somewhat deaf to all the other voices that surround us, the non-human voices. It seems to me that, as I'm sure many of you know, our colleagues in mathematics and in complexity science for the last 15, 20 years have been discovering that even the air currents in this room, the currents of invisible air coming out of my nostrils that make these little vortices, or the other movements of air in the room, they say we can never predict just how these movements of air, even if we know exactly the state of the room and the air within the room at one moment, we cannot predict just how it's going to shape itself in the next moment. And so they say it's chaotic behavior. They say the same thing about the heart beating in our chest. We cannot precisely predict the next micro moment of the next heartbeat because it's always just a bit out of phase. It's never exactly mechanically precise so that it can respond to a sudden surprise from the outside. It is unpredictable. It is, they say, it follows a chaotic pattern of behavior. It's a strange word, chaotic. They say the same thing if it's raining and the movement of a water droplet down the surface of the window. We cannot even predict just how that drop is going to fall, whether it will here swerve to the right or to the left. Even if we know just how it is falling in the last moment, we cannot know exactly how it's going to fall the next. They say, its behavior is chaotic, which is a very strange word to choose. At least in English, the word chaos usually means out of control, completely out of any order whatsoever. But that's not what they mean. They don't mean to say that the heartbeat is completely out of control, but that it is out of our control. That the air currents in the room are not out of control, but they are out of our control. That is to say, a much better word for what they mean is wild. That the heart beating in our chest is wild. The air currents are wild. The water droplets or the waves crashing on the beach are wild. Wildness is what we are made of. And we cannot escape it. And even in the middle of the city, even on the 35th floor of some skyscraper, in some office, if you walk over to the refrigerator and open it and someone left a lunch in there last week, and you open that, what you see? Wildness. That is to say, the earth, nature, wildness permeates us. It is inside of us and it's all around us. If we would allow it back into our speaking, if we would allow that the city itself is just a relatively domesticated zone of wildness, but is still wild. And then there are these relatively undomesticated zones when we go up into the mountains or into the depths of an old forest. It's really, really wild there, but it's wild everywhere. Even inside our own heads, when we lie down to sleep at night, the chaos of our dreams. It's not chaos, it's just wild. So I think that by shifting even just a little bit some of the ways that we speak, we begin to feel the world, to feel the earth around us again. And this is a style of experience that seems to be common to our indigenous brothers and sisters, and without doubt to our own indigenous ancestors. It is a sense that everything that we can sense, anything we can sense, is also assumed to be a sensitive, even a sentient being in its own right. Of course, the other animals. Not that they are the same as us. They are each very different. The spider who weaves the cosmos out of its own abdomen and just creates a whole spiraling galaxy or web out of itself. and the humpback whale who just, swims through the depths of the ocean and sending its eerie glissando cries through miles and miles of liquid ocean to communicate with other humpback whales. So different from our experience up here on the dry earth with our opposable thumbs. But our experience is so very different from that of the soaring hawk, hovering above its prey. Each being very different in its experience from the others, and yet the assumption is all of them are just as present, just as awake and aware as we are, but in a very different shape. But not just the other animals, the plants, the trees, the grasses, even whole forests are assumed to be alive and awake. But not just the plants and the other animals, but even the rocks and the mountains have their long, deeply layered experience of us and of the earth. Even the winds and the weather patterns, rivers, dry riverbeds, thunderclouds, particular winds that pour through a mountain pass or another wind that comes rolling up the river valley, only in a certain season and only at a certain time of day in that season. But it's assumed that that wind has its own intelligence, its own life. This experience is very old in us. And it is the way one experiences the world when your animal senses are all awake and listening. Of course, you will be just assuming that everything is alive, or at least potentially alive, because that keeps your ears very attentive, listening to what might be being said by these other beings. And it keeps your skin very awake, feeling for what the world might be feeling. But you cannot empathize with an inert object, with an inanimate object. And so much more practical, then, to allow that everything is alive. Many people would say to me, come on, David, you are inviting us, asking us to begin to open up relationships with other animals and with plants and with the ground itself. But we don't even have any half-decent relation with other humans. So don't we need to heal our relationship with others of our own species first, before we can really open up and begin to dialogue with the rest of the earth? No. I think that's entirely backwards. Because the reason we don't readily and easily communicate with one another, it seems to me, is because we have shut ourselves off from relationship with the context in which all of our human communication takes place. What's a simple way to demonstrate this? If, suppose for a moment, that there was a creature like us, that is, as I was saying before, completely co-evolved with the winds and the rain and the savanna and the forests and many other animals, gazelles and deer and even, huge creatures that are quite dangerous, that can eat us and often do take us as prey. But so our whole sensorium is evolved to be able to notice and pay attention to the shadows of other creatures and the eyes coming from very different faces from our own, furry faces and antlered creatures who we hunt And the whole nervous system itself co-evolved with these many other nervous systems and shapes and textures of life, suddenly is born into a context, just quite recently, a context where all of that other life is spoken of as just a set of basically determinate, inanimate objects and purely objective processes that can be quantified and measured. And so the human creature, not knowing how to enter into communication with what is an inert or inanimate or determinate object, sort of loses, doesn't know how to practice any kind of relationship there. But so we turn toward the only place where there still is some kind of mystery that is allowed to be mystery, some kind of enigmatic otherness, is in other human being. Because yes, we have our mechanical objective bodies, but we also have our spiritual minds that are something quite different from the rest of nature. And so we turn toward our lovers, our husbands or our wives, for instance, craving still the nourishment that once came from being in active relationship with dragonfly and moonrise and thundercloud and the wind stirring in the grasses and other big winds that come pouring down from the high mountain passes. But instead of having any of that relationship, our nervous system is still, for 1,000,000 years was tuned by those relationships, but now we can only get it from other people. And so we turn toward our partner wanting all of that otherness. And, well, I really love you, darling, but I'm just not feeling met by you. It's just not working. And she is feeling the same. And in fact, it blows apart so many relationships, one after another, because another human who is shaped so much like us, a nervous system that is basically the same as ours, cannot possibly provide all of that rich, wild otherness that nourishment we once got from being in active interaction with spiders spinning their webs and the tracks of wolves as we track them across the snowy field, and yes, of huge forest creatures and the forests themselves in their branching powers, and owls and whales and salmon, whose patterns we were so exquisitely attuned to when they would come flooding back up into the rivers after 3 years again. Whoa. But we don't have, we just speak of the salmon now as a resource. It's not something we relate to. So we turn for relationship to our human community. But the human community can't possibly provide all of that wonder and rich, wild, and dangerous otherness. And so it makes all of our human relationships very brittle, very stiff and brittle, because we want so much more from them than they can possibly provide. What I am intending to suggest here, or intending to bring across or communicate, even across a language barrier, is that the ecological crisis, the extreme environmental crisis in which we now find ourselves, with so many other species, other animals, and plants, whole other styles of sensitivity and sentience vanishing from the world rapidly, day by day, as the planet itself is shivering into a bone-wrenching fever, as the climate itself is heating up much more quickly than we had anticipated. It seems to me that this situation is usefully looked at as a kind of perceptual crisis, that it is born of a kind of sensory blindness that we humans have not really, for quite a while, we just haven't really noticed or seen that this actual Earth is really here, that these other animals are really a part of the same world that we inhabit. The plants, the waters. I mean, we see the land, but we don't really see it. We don't feel it. We don't sense it with any intensity, with anything of the poignancy or strength with which our organism could be sensing the rest of nature. Somehow our eyes have become somewhat blind, our ears somewhat deaf to all the other voices that surround us, the non-human voices.
I go along with a great deal of what you said. It makes an enormous amount of sense. But what I don't understand and what I haven't heard you address is, why do we do it? Why do we objectify nature? Why do we objectify other people? Why do we create these concrete jungles to protect ourselves from the rest of the world?
It's really quite a big question, but the answer, it seems to me, has to be. It has to lie in the fact that the world that we are not relating to, or the very world of relationship, this biosphere, this breathing biosphere that I am suggesting we need to remember ourselves to, become members of, feel ourselves as members of once again, not just on this earth, but in this earth, is not a particularly nice place. It is not something sweet and sentimental. It is not a harmonious biosphere where the lion lays down with the lamb. No, lions will eat sheep when they're hungry, but sometimes the lambs can sleep close by if the lions have been well fed for a couple nights. But the sheep know damn well that one of them is going to get eaten soon. You know, it is a world in which humans, too, if we are a part of it, it means recognizing that there are things out there that can eat us and will eat us. Whether they are large mammals, not so much anymore, but the kinds of diseases that are now beginning to spread unchecked out of the specific small ecosystems that once harbored and held them in check. The global spread of infectious diseases that is now accompanying climate change, and that we are all susceptible to, not just disease, but simply allowing or identifying, as I've been suggesting, with our animal body, means accepting that we are inside of something we cannot master. We're not in control of it. It's not that it's out of control, but it's out of our control. And hence we are vulnerable. And that is frightening, massively frightening. I think, to contemporary humans in particular, because our whole civilization has been set up to give us the illusion that we are in control. The trouble is that in setting up this illusion, we have taken ourselves so much out of relation with the world that the world is beginning to choke. It's not just beginning to choke, it's beginning to vomit upon us and bite back with tremendous ferocity. And this earth, this breathing biosphere is not, if we feel it as alive, which I would suggest it of course is, but it's not a sweet Mother Nature. It's quite a wild witch of a being who sacrifices us very easily. So to wake up within this world is to wake up in a deeply shadowed, difficult, dangerous, and yet outrageously, awesomely beautiful world. I think the reason we do it is because of fear. Fear of being a body, which is to say, being mortal, but not just that we are mortal and will die, but even more so, each moment that we are vulnerable, not just to nature and to the wild storms and earthquakes and tsunamis and illnesses that can come and beset us unexpectedly, but also vulnerable to one another and to the gaze of another person who looks at me and maybe she thinks that I don't look quite right, or that there's something wrong with the way I look, or she thinks I'm too fat, or maybe he thinks I'm too skinny. I'm vulnerable if I identify with my animal presence, so it's much better to hide out in a set of abstractions and not really be present here with my senses awake. And the last thing to say with that is that today, particularly in the last, 10, 15 years, it's become even harder for people to come into this more full-bodied relationship with the world, because even people of very good heart and will, like all of us in this room, I think there's a deep sense that if I were to really sense and feel the land around me as something that breathes, not that it's alive like me, but that my life is a part of its life, which is very different, much bigger than mine, and much different because it's round and it's spinning in the solar wind. It's a quite other kind of life than anything we've known, and yet we have known it all along. But if I let myself remember it and feel it, I think many of us feel it's going to be too painful, because there are so many losses. There are so many wounds around me. The forests clear-cut, the rivers dammed up, the salmon dwindling, their populations. I don't want to feel that. I prefer to just look at them as numbers, because if I feel them as living, intelligent aspects of this huge, sentient life that I'm a part of, it will hurt to feel all the losses. And I don't want to feel it. And so, in response to that, I need to say, and I say this also from the depth of my heart, that it seems to me today, with so many onrushing catastrophes on every hand, both within the human world and within the more than human world, all of these losses cascading through the biosphere as a result of the rapid change in the climate, that we humans deeply need to find our way back inside the biosphere. But in order to do that, it's just, we have to step through a threshold of grief, of actually coming into our senses, waking up our animal senses. And when we first do that, it's like, whew, there are a lot of losses. There has been a great deal that has been destroyed or broken. And we need to allow ourselves to feel that. If we do, and we let the tears flow, it seems to me the soil needs that water. It needs to feel us and our tears, feeling it. And as soon as it does, it's like a key that unlocks a door that opens onto a world of wonders. A world filled with exquisite sensations and delights and joys and sadnesses. It's a deeply shadowed world where suffering plays an important part. But it is also filled with so much joy, so much pleasure of finally being held and sustained by relationships with every part of our world. And hence feeling them and being felt by them. We need this. And as long as we don't let ourselves grieve the losses, then we don't feel any of that joy. And we don't get any of that nourishment. And our organism just ossifies. And the biosphere goes down. It just is going down without it. So, sort of a long answer to your question.
I like the phrase. It makes a lot of sense.
It does make sense. Great. Great. For much of humankind has been caught up in a very different relation to the holy, a sense of relationship with something that's much bigger than us, yes, but it exists somewhere behind the stars, somewhere else. It transcends the physical, sensuous world entirely. And so this world is a kind of way station. Not that important, really, if we wreck this world, because it's not what's really sacred is somewhere else. And I'm not getting down on our religious traditions. I myself am Jewish, and I feel quite close to the Jewish faith. But I think there has been a massive blind spot within our traditions. Huge, how much they have played into and supported this impulse to hide from the difficult vulnerability of real relationship with other people and places and beings. And we are living at a moment when it is necessary to break out of that blind spot or to heal it and to open each of our traditions beyond that astonishingly closed down style of belief, and recognize that there is a much older faith that has always been with us, and that secretly still underlies all of the great religious traditions, is an animal faith, our bodies' faith in the active support of the ground and the nourishment of the air, and in the fact that the sun is going to rise again the next morning. That is a kind of faith in mountains and rivers, and the eternal return of the salmon into the rivers. That's a faith, the body's faith in this world. And yes, we all know that even in the modern world, there's still this craving to feel a part of something so much bigger than oneself, and to know that we are held in a story much, much vaster and bigger. But our language only gives us ways of thinking of it that place that wholeness somewhere else, somewhere outside the material world, somewhere outside the physical. Is it not possible today for us to recognize that this earth is just such a wholeness? This vast whirling body turning among the stars in the solar wind, this sensitive tissue made of light and water and breath that is our larger flesh, out of which we were born and into which we sort of turn inside out and feed back into at death. We spread out into this larger life, turning among the stars, this heaven, this holiness. I mean, is it possible in some way to taste and feel ourselves as a part of a kind of body that's actually eternal relative to our lives? The life of the earth is a kind of eternity into which we return, and out of which we are born and return. I'll just mention, by way of closing, a little bit from my own somewhat indigenous and tribal tradition, which is the Hebrew tradition, the Jewish tradition, because I believe that that every tradition has these traces of an earthly cosmology hidden within it, if we can find them. In the Jewish tradition, we also have a word that means spirit and breath inseparably. The word is ruach. Ruach. Where I live in New Mexico, the tribal people, the Navajo people, they have a word nilti, which means the holy wind. And the holy wind gives all things life and breath and awareness. Awareness comes from the holy wind, or nilti. Well, in Hebrew, our word is ruach. It's a very sacred word within our tradition, because the ruach, which is sometimes translated as rushing spirit, is the very presence of God in the body's world, in the sensuous world. It's the wind, the moving air. And it's there in the first sentence of the Hebrew Bible. The world was without form and void, and a wind of God moved over the waters. A ruach of God moved over the waters. Very potent, very sacred for us. But it is not the most sacred word in our tradition. That would be the four-letter name of God. It's called Tetragrammaton by the Greeks. It's spelled YHWH, or the Hebrew letters are Yud, He, Vav, He. Are there any Jewish folks in the room? You? Anyone else? Ah, good. A few of us. Okay. So, YHWH, one would say. And we've heard this pronounced and written out sometimes as Yahweh. But that's not legitimate, you know, because we don't know how it's pronounced. It is so secret the way this most holy name of the divine is to be intoned, it's so secret, it's so sacred, that we have kind of forgot how to say it. Well, all we know is that there was a great secret to the pronunciation of this name. But the mystery and strangeness lies in the fact that there's no vowels in the name. It's just Y-H-W-H. So we're not sure what vowels to put in there. Why didn't we put vowels in the name of God? Well, because there's no vowels in the Hebrew alphabet. It's just consonants, the Aleph Beit. This most early alphabet, the ancestor of the alphabets we use here in Sweden or in North America or elsewhere in Europe, the ancient Middle Eastern Aleph Beit is just consonants. Why didn't we have vowels in the writing system? Because, you see, the vowels are the breath sounds. A, E, I, O, U are the sounds made by the unimpeded breath as it moves through the mouth. Ha, E, U, O. But the consonants are the shapes we give to the breath. B, K, D, W. The breath itself, however, is the ruach. It is the very presence of God in the body's world. It is the spirit. And you cannot make a visible representation of the invisible spirit, of the breath, of the wind. And so we didn't do it. We just wrote down the consonants. Interesting. But if you look again at the four letters that make up the name of God, Y-H-W-H, and you meditate upon these like a good Kabbalist for month after month and year after year, you'll gradually notice that there's something curious about these four letters. Actually, it's three letters. One repeats itself. Y-H-W-H. You may notice that they are the most breath-like consonants in any alphabet. Y, H, W, and then the H repeats. And if you then meditate upon that, like a good mystic, for another year, or two, or three, it may suddenly hit you like a fist out of the invisible, that of course there is a secret to the pronunciation of this name. And it probably sounds very different from the way we've heard it said. This most holy name of the divine in the Western tradition probably sounds much more like this, if it is said rightly. Like this. That the most holy name of the divine in our Western traditions is the name that we all speak when we are conscious of our breathing. This ceaseless rocking in and out of ourselves that binds the invisible depths within us to the unseen depths all around us and connects our blood to the lungs of a swallow swooping by and to the soils and to the branches of the apple trees and to the oceans. We are of one spirit with the earth, one mind with this huge breathing biosphere. So I'll end with a little poem by Rainer Maria Rilke. He says, not to be cut off, not through the slightest partition, shut out from the law of the stars. The inner, what is it if not intensified sky, hurled through with birds and deep with the winds of homecoming? Not to be cut off, not through the slightest partition, shut out from the law of the stars. The inner, what is it if not intensified sky, hurled through with birds and deep with the winds of homecoming? Thank you, guys.